Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative webinar, Big Risks, Big Rewards, Overcoming Obstacles to Elder Abuse Prosecutions. Due to the high number of participants, computer audio will be the only option to listen to the presentation. So please make sure your computer speakers are on. This webinar will be recorded and available on the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative website after this training. Closed captioning is provided in the pod below the presentation. If you are having issues viewing closed captioning and do not have an Adobe Connect app installed on your computer, please close out of this meeting, download the Adobe Connect application, and then rejoin the webinar. If you do not wish to download the app, close out of the webinar, make sure Adobe Flash is enabled on the web browser, rejoin the meeting, and then click on the link and join with the classic view. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, you can communicate with me in the chat pod. I'm now going to turn this over to Judith Kozlowski, Consultant to the Elder Justice Initiative. Welcome, Judith.
Thank you. First, I'd like to welcome everyone who is both participating in the webinar and also listening to us. We hope that at the end we'll be able to have some interactive participation, but given the number of people, we may just have to go to the Q&A, and I apologize for that. But everyone's emails are listed and my contact information at the end, so please feel free if there's something that's unfulfilled when we're finished, please feel free to get in contact with us. So a little bit about the Elder Justice Initiative. The Elder Justice Initiative is part of the Department of Justice's enforcement and programming efforts to combat elder abuse, neglect, and financial fraud and scams that target older adults. We do this in several ways by promoting justice for older adults, helping older victims and their families, enhancing state and local efforts through training and resources and many collaborative efforts, and supporting research to improve elder abuse policies and practices. Today we have, three incredibly experienced, I think we're off by a slide here, but anyway, prosecutors to share with us their perspectives over a long period of time, both in the civil and the criminal arena doing elder abuse cases. Our first speaker is going to be Amy Mika. Amy is the Chief of the Elder Justice Section of the Office of the Attorney General here in the District of Columbia, where we are located. The section was established in 2019 to better protect the district's elders and vulnerable adults from financial abuse through enforcement of a new law that was created to providing both criminal and civil penalties for financial exploitation and undue influence. Prior to that time, Amy was a supervising attorney at the Legal Counsel for the Elderly, one of the nation's leading providers of free legal services and advocacy for older residents. During her 16 years there, she represented any number of homeowner victims and equity stripping schemes and other real property fraud, as well as representing them in other consumer-related cases. Our second speaker today is Arlene Markarian from the Nassau District Attorney's Office, where she is the chief of their elder abuse unit and has been there since November of 2016. In addition to creating the elder abuse unit there, she's also been responsible for bringing together professionals in Nassau County to create Nassau County's first elder abuse multidisciplinary team, where she has meetings every month to discuss the issues having to do with elder abuse and what professionals in the area are seeing. Prior to that, she worked in, prior to working in Nassau County, she was an assistant DA in Kings County in Brooklyn in the district attorney's office there from 1990, where she ran their domestic violence bureau there. She was promoted to running their elder abuse unit in their, which is part of their domestic violence bureau, and was tasked with creating that unit in 1999. She has supervised and prosecuted thousands of domestic violence and elder abuse cases, and we welcome her experience to this afternoon. Our third speaker, Jennifer Mika, is an Assistant Attorney General in the Office of the Attorney General in the District of Columbia, and important, I think, for this discussion, she's also a Special Assistant United States Attorney because D.C. has dual jurisdiction. She's the first person to hold that unique position that is located both at the Office of the Attorney General and in the U.S. Attorney's Office in order to increase the prosecution of financial crimes, particularly against elders in the district. She was recently awarded a Director's Award from the Executive Office of the United States Attorney for her work in this area. She has handled a lot of civil commitment, probate, criminal, and civil proceedings, and as well as at the Department of Disability Services in the District of Columbia, and is very familiar with issues surrounding Medicaid and Social Security law as well. She has been in the position of this particular position in the last couple of years as it was recently founded, but she's also done a lot of work in the area of exploitation in guardianship and conservative proceedings. So we have a wide range of experience here, and I look forward to listening to each one of the challenges that they've had in their respective careers and how they've overcome them, as well as their wish list for making life better for all of us. So I now turn it over to Amy.
Great, thank you. Hopefully I've successfully unmuted myself here on this phone. Somebody will speak up if I'm not being heard. Thank you to everybody for coming. My name is Amy Mix. I am with the Office of the Attorney General for the District of Columbia, and my colleague Jennifer Mika, who's also here with me. You can see her name on the slide. I think that our contact information slide was missing from the intro, so we'll be sure and put contact information in the chat box. So feel free, of course, to reach out to us if you have any questions after this. So just a little bit about our team, because I think we are somewhat unique across the country in how we are divided up. So the Elder Justice team is really two components in our office. We have both a criminal enforcement side, and that's Jen Mika, who you'll hear from shortly. That's in purple. And she's within the Public Safety Division. But we also have, which I think is the sort of unique part about this, is a whole civil enforcement side. So we have an Elder Justice section, and that's my team over here on the green in the Public Interest Division. And under our statute that I'm going to give you a look at in just a minute, because I think it's a helpful statute that we've got. It's new to our it's new to the district, and it might be something you want to try to bring to your own jurisdiction. But the different things that, whoa, sorry, slides are just moving around here. Here we go. So our team can get injunctive relief. We ask for restitution as an equitable remedy. We can get civil penalties of up to $5,000 per violation of the Act. We can also revoke professional licenses. So if the exploiter, and I'm sorry, we handle all financial exploitation cases is what our team focuses on. But if the exploiter was a home health aide or a nurse and that's how they gained access to their victims, we can actually revoke the professional licenses. And then we also have administrative subpoena powers, so we can use that early on in the investigation pre-suit. So the statute I mentioned that I think is a great one, and of course every statute after you start to use it, you realize ways that it could have been drafted better and tweaks that would be helpful to make. So we actually have some amendments pending right now in the DC Council. But generally what it does is it created both criminal and civil penalties for financial exploitation, including undue influence of seniors or vulnerable adults. And so part of what's great about the statute is it just creates two buckets of people who are protected. So you can be an older adult, 65 and over for our statute, or a vulnerable adult. And you can see the definition there of what a vulnerable adult is for our statute, and it's fairly broad. It also includes financial exploitation by undue influence, and we've got a whole definition of undue influence I'm going to turn to in just a second here, actually right now. It also created express enforcement powers by the Attorney General's office, so that's what creates my civil section. The statutory definition of undue influence here, it talks about mental, emotional, or physical coercion that overcomes the free will or judgment of a vulnerable adult or senior and then has them take some sort of action that's against their own financial, emotional, mental, or physical well-being. You can see the council threw every word with lots of commas in there that they could to try to make this as broad as possible. So prior to the statute being enacted, really the only time in DC case law that undue influence comes up is in the probate context, so in challenging wills and, somebody who's left their entire estate to their maid or something. And so we really didn't have a concept of undue influence to address an action that happened while someone was still alive, right? And so This is a new term for us, and we actually have just started using it in court. Our section was created just last year, so it's taken us a little while to sort of get our feet under us and get us up and running. We've got about a dozen cases pending in court right now, and one of them focuses purely on undue influence. So I'm sorry, this is a tiny little text because I just wanted to give you a little taste. It's a very tiny taste, clearly, of the different kinds of cases that we have filed on the civil side. So we tend to get our referrals from Adult Protective Services. They come into our office, and then Jen with the criminal lens and me with the civil lens, we talk about all the referrals that come in, and we decide who's going to call dibs on it. And then that's the team that takes it and runs with it. And so some of the cases that my civil side has filed, we've got one where a woman who opened a credit card in her father's name, went on a shopping spree with it, spent about, I think it was about $4,400. This other one, we've got a 27-year-old who self-officiated, which is also a new thing in DC. You can self-officiate your wedding. So she self-officiated a wedding with her 73-year-old victim who's got severe dementia and actually has a guardian and a conservator appointed now. But she took over his finances. She became his power of attorney. She spent about $200,000 of his $400,000 that he had inherited from his mother. And then this last one is actually the one I just mentioned with the undue influence, where we had we've got a woman who drives about an hour down to D.C. on the 3rd of every month because that's when Social Security benefits are deposited, and she takes her victim, her very disabled victim with diminished capacity, to the bank, and they withdraw the whole $2,000 each month, and then she takes it and spends it. And so this is the one where we had to bring in an expert witness and talk about undue influence with the judge for the first time, really. And I'm going to talk about that next in the challenges slide. So in terms of challenges, the biggest challenges that I can think of, and we'll sort of talk about the wish list as I address these each. The first one is about finding viable cases, and I included this graphic. Every time Jen and I present, we include this graphic, and then we fight over who gets to use it because we both really like it. I think it really sums up the idea of underreporting. And so you can see there for every one case of financial exploitation that gets reported, there's another 43, right? You've got the tip of the iceberg and then the whole 43 that are under the water. And that is, of course, the perpetual problem with trying to find viable cases and making sure that financial exploitation and other abuse gets addressed. So some of the ways that we've dealt with that are trying to make contacts with banks. We have our agency that regulates some banks in town and has good relationships with them. We are trying to work with them, to work with the banks to try to get better reporting. We've noticed there are some banks that do a really good job of it. There are other banks that send us fuzzy faxes with 8-point font. And so we're trying to work on that. Also increasing community outreach and community education and training to our sister agencies so that they know how to identify abuse and exploitation, and then they refer it to us when they see it. Another one is working with older victims. When we started teaming up with victim services folks, we realized that they had very little experience working with older victims, but we also learned that 1 in 10 of the victims of sexual assault that they served were older adults. And so it was this interesting sort of gap in services that they were seeing older adult victims but didn't really know much about working with older adults. And so the first thing we always want to tell everybody, of course, that there's no assumptions, right? We want to be careful not to make assumptions about someone just because they're older. But there are some general guidelines about working with older adults that we have to keep in mind. There's a great resource. There's an organization, MIE, and they've got a journal that comes out, and a colleague of mine from my old office, Legal Counsel for the Elderly, wrote a great article about working with older adults and how to interview older clients. And if anyone wants to see that, feel free to email me later and I'll figure out how I can get you a copy of it. I think it's really good as people start to try to work with older adults. Lots of really good tips in there. But, little things like timing of interview, the form of the interview, especially now with the pandemic, how are you going to do a virtual interview, how you're going to get someone outside the presence of someone who is normally their helper, whether or not that's the abuser. You've got diminished capacity concerns. How do how do you define if someone's consenting or not consenting, if they have capacity? These are all the kinds of things that my staff, as we've created this new section, because they were not familiar with working with older adults, those are the kinds of things that we've had to do a lot of training on. And I think when I asked them for this presentation what some of their hurdles were, that was one that came up. Another one that has come up is judicial education. So I talked about that undue influence case we just had. We just had a hearing this morning in the case, and the judge had clearly some discomfort with the undue influence theory because the woman who's taking all of this guy's money does do a little bit for him. She certainly shouldn't be taking all of his money, and he's living destitute and without food and safe housing because of it. But he was telling the judge, but I want to give her all my money. And so the judge clearly had some discomfort, and, you can totally understand that, with overriding what he was saying he wanted to do with his money. And so as we do judicial education, we've actually reached out to the judges last year for their in-service training days. We actually got a 1-hour spot on their docket where we got to come in and talk about our statute and our cases. I think I'm going to try to do that again this year and bring our expert to talk about undue influence to try to prime the pump some for these cases. And so we're doing that also for mediators. And so that's one of the solutions we've come across. And then last, I'm going to wrap up with referrals and how to add value even if it's a case you can't take. And so for sure, one of the ways to add value if it's not a case you can criminally prosecute is to look for your civil partners. And so in our office, that's easy because I've got a whole section that's sitting here ready to take civil cases. But out in your states, probably in your Office of the Attorney General, usually housed within the consumer protection folks, there's probably someone there who's designated to work on senior abuse and exploitation cases. So that's where you might find those folks. Teaming up with Adult Protective Services or the Long-Term Care Ombudsman in your state, the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, or your area agency on aging. Those are all places where you would be able to find government partners, mostly government partners, who work in the aging area that might be good connections either for referral sources or just referrals to you or from you. And then in terms of building community partners so that you can have sort of a coordinated response in your community to elder abuse and exploitation, I listed a couple contacts there in the people you would look for the victim advocates, the legal services, and looking for senior day programs. So I'm going to wrap up with that and move on to Arlene, but we'll be here for any questions.
Hi, everyone. Let's see, I'm starting this right now. Again, this is Arlene Markarian, so let's get right into this. And I think I want to start off with talking about ageism and stereotypes, because what I've found over the years is that we all engage in this in some way when we make presumptions about people. And it's so important to recognize when you're doing it and put it aside. And sometimes it's because of your own experiences with older people in your life, and then you think that other people are going to be acting the same way or showing the same symptoms, and it's not true. So whenever anybody says, all older people have bad memories or bruise easily, all these different things, more often than not, it's not going to be true. And we have to do the training. We just talked about this now, the training with everybody to recognize when they're doing that, because if we accept this and we engage in it, then we're not investigating. So when a potential abuser is saying, oh, my mother's got Alzheimer's, my mother bruises easily, if we don't look any further, then we're ignoring it, and we're not going to be able to start investigating and identify the elder abuse. And I think this is important too. Now, the cases that I've dealt with in my career have all been physical abuse and neglect cases. Those are the cases that I work with. And while typically there are more than one type of abuse, there's more than one type of abuse that's happening at the same time, co-occurring, physical with financial. Typically there's going to be some sort of financial involved. Money, as they say, is the root of all evil, and everybody wants somebody's money. But the physical abuse aspect of this, especially when it comes to Alzheimer's, the abusers use forgetfulness in people's ages and ageism to try to get people not to listen to the victim or pay attention to what they're saying. And it's so important not to take any claim of cognitive impairment at face value. You have to ask the follow-up questions, even if the victim is saying that to you. I've had numerous victims tell me they have Alzheimer's or dementia, and when I ask them, when's the last time they've been to the doctor, who diagnosed them, the response is, well, I'm always forgetting and my family tells me I have it. So it's very important to ask these questions because it may not be. It may not be Alzheimer's. It could be other things. if there is even an issue at all. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a profile of the abuser and physical abuse especially. This is not just for New York State. This is nationally. It's going to be the adult child or grandchild or other close family member who most likely lives with the senior, is a substance abuser, may have some degree of mental illness. And I'm going to say this, not all people with mental illness are abusers. In fact, most folks with mental illness are managing their illnesses and living law-abiding lives. But when you have these factors, this is when it becomes a powder keg. You have mental health issues, you're not getting the proper treatment, and you're self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, you're unemployed, and you're living with an aging relative, and you rely on them. You know, as opposed to the victim relying on the person for care, you're relying on them for a roof over your head, for money for your habit, and this is where things escalate in a household. When I was in Brooklyn, I just want to say that in my unit, we handled our homicide cases, and we had from 1999 to 2016 when I left, about 26 elder domestic homicides. 21 of them were parental, parent or grandparent that was killed by an adult child or grandchild. And in all of those cases, the defendants had some degree of mental illness and or a substance abuse problem. And what was really notable was that only 1 or 2 families had any contact with any system to get help. And we know people aren't just, you know, waking up and murdering somebody in their family. Violence escalates in a household. And so, as was shown on that graph before, it's the tip of the iceberg. It's so highly underreported, and we need everybody to get in there to find where the abuse is happening. So part of this is evidence, and you know, a lot of the law enforcement folks that might be on right now, it may seem obvious, but sometimes we got to talk about the obvious. Photographs of injuries are really important, but also lack of injuries on a perpetrator, especially if they're claiming self-defense. And I would also say all injuries on a victim, not just the most serious ones, because we don't know what the defense is going to be by the time the case goes to trial. And sometimes, depending on where these injuries are, even the minor ones, it can combat whatever defense is being proposed to the jury. Evidence of neglect, and this is important because I hardly ever get any of this. The photographs of empty refrigerators or refrigerators with locks on them, pressure ulcers at different stages, long fingernails, toenails, and bad hygiene. All these things need to be photographed, typically when the person is first seen or brought to the ER, as opposed to afterwards when they're cleaned up. We want photographs of the person's home, any property damage, and evidence of substance abuse. If the abuser is a substance abuser, then evidence of it, if there's anything lying around the house, empty beer cans. We just had this a few weeks ago where we told the family and the caregivers to take pictures of the garbage cans and see if there's any empty bottles and cans, and there were plenty, and they were very compelling photographs. So you want to get photographs of that, because most of the abusers are not going to just roll over and say, yeah, you're right, I'm an abuser, and I'm also drinking and doing drugs. They won't admit it unless they're confronted with the evidence. Security cameras, I can't even begin to tell you how important it is to look everywhere for security footage. The jury's expected, and if there are cameras there and the video is not taken and preserved, then we take a hit at trial, a tremendous hit. These videos really speak 1,000 words, and to be able to show people what happened is really important. And I would suggest that if there's a neglect situation going on, that if you think that somebody's being left alone for hours on end, the videos can show that as well, which is important. You want to make sure that anything that a suspected abuser said is documented. It doesn't matter if you're law enforcement or if you're a social worker or if you're in a hospital. It doesn't matter. If you suspect abuse, document what somebody is saying to you and when and where they said it. Things like he bruises easily, all that we talked about before. She's got dementia. I'm power of attorney. I'm the guardian. I raise this from especially my state because New York State has very limited laws regarding caregiving and prosecuting caregivers. We have to show the person is actually the caregiver. And I have to say that, sometimes it's not that easy. So you want to get all the evidence you can to show that they're actually the caregiver and they took the duty on. And I'm going to leave the last piece of evidence, which is there's so much evidence out there, but don't forget to do a social media dive and looking into people's Facebook and whatever other kind of social media. It is amazing to me what people will post. I don't know why I'm still surprised by this, but we have to prove that they're guilty, not necessarily that they're smart, and they go online and they post these photographs and they say these things that show that they're guilty. I had a caregiver once who posted online after she got arrested for neglect. She left and she posted that she was, she was going to a concert and she wasn't going home, and there was a lot of evidence there to show how in the past she was going out all night partying and using her mother's money for all the tickets and everything, but her mother needed care, and she told her family that she was going to care for the mother. So this kind of stuff can build the case of neglect. And you've seen this already, but it's important to know in jurisdictions where you don't have a multidisciplinary team that you can try to do this on your own. Before we had MDTs in Brooklyn and in New York and Nassau County, we were doing this. We were contacting all these different agencies that we can work with to help our victims. Prosecutors can't do it alone. Law enforcement can't do it alone. The prosecution of a case, the arrest of a perpetrator, doesn't provide the victim with all the services and support that they need, even after the prosecution is completed. So we need to get all these professionals involved to work together, because even if we can't prosecute the offender, if the victim is now made safe and is not being abused anymore and is getting the services that they need, then I think we can all say we did a good job that day. And while we want to hold offenders accountable, sometimes we can't, but the victim still needs that help. So these are some of my biggest hurdles. I was trying to figure out how to narrow it down. And I don't want to, this is no disrespect to the judiciary. It's, again, this has to do with training and perhaps understanding, and also what's being argued to them. So prosecutors need to learn what information to give judges so that they can make an informed decision. But after an arrest, when a defendant's being arrested for abusing, especially an elderly parent, it is really difficult to get into that household and help the parents when the defendant's permitted to go back home and still exert pressure and fear over their victims. And I would throw this out there too, that unlike any other case I've ever dealt with, parental abuse, parents care more about their child, about their abuser than they do themselves. Anybody that's got a kid can understand that you love your child no matter what. And so we have to recognize that when dealing with these cases. They don't want their children to be homeless. They want them to get help. They want them back home. They don't want them to starve, even if the children are 50 years old, which is what I'm dealing with. So we have to address these issues about orders of protection, proving cases without the victim's testimony, so we can take the burden of the prosecution off the victim and look at a defendant and say, we're going forward without your parents, and we can do that. But we can't do it if we don't have all the evidence. And so the investigation needs to be just like a homicide case. We prove homicide cases every day without the victim. We can do it in these cases as well. We just need the evidence, whether it's photographs, videos, whether it's taking a statement and seeing if the defendant says something that will inculpate him or her. It's so important. And there's a real lack of training in neglect out there. Over the years, I've gotten so few cases. And I have to tell you this, most people think that my cases involve folks with dementia. The vast majority of the cases I have seen over the last couple of decades has been with folks that are cognitively intact. I can count on two hands the cases that involve folks with advanced dementia. They can't call 911. They can't ask for help. they are hidden, and that's why this training of whether it's with the police, whether it's with social service agencies, first responders, medical professionals, it's really important. I saw there was a question regarding training. You know, training is done by prosecutors, it's done by social service agencies in your jurisdiction and outside your jurisdiction. So you can find training for this in the DOJ. There are many places that provide training. And for me, in my state, I think we're the last state in the union left that does not have any mandated reporting of elder abuse, which makes it very hard to find those cases, I think, with those folks that have advanced dementia or serious disabilities that can't call for help. If there was mandated reporting, I think we would get a lot, they would put them on the radar at least. Even if an arrest couldn't be made, it would put these folks on the radar where they're not right now. And my wish list, or as I joked before, my wish, you know, I want my pony. Well, these are my ponies. The mental health system. I brought up before the profile of an abuser for this very reason. I can tell you that the mental health system is broken. I'm assuming it's not just in New York and it's throughout the country. And we are picking up the pieces in the criminal justice system. You have mentally ill offenders who aren't getting their treatment, or they're supposed to get treatment and they stop, and there's no teeth in the various statutes that provide that they're supposed to get their treatment. We need to have our legislators re-look at this and figure out how we can go forward with making sure that people, certainly that are involved in the criminal justice system and are being abusive or violent, how can we get them the mandated treatment that they need? And I would also, you know, we also want to look at hospitals and nursing homes and facilities. I was speaking to one of my colleagues that's with the AG in New York, and she's on a multidisciplinary team, and we talked about a case where this woman was in a dementia unit, and she was beaten up, but there was no way of showing who beat her up. We think it was one of the other residents. And so, but there's no requirement for any security cameras in these facilities in the common areas. And I really think that we need to relook at this, and that there needs to be mandated security cameras with recordings, so that people that can't protect themselves or speak up for themselves can be protected, and people can be held accountable. And again, with the mandated reporting, I want mandated reporting in New York State. This is a long discussion, but I can say at the very least I would like to see it with people that aren't able to report for themselves. There's big debates regarding whether people should lose their right to self-determination, but I think at the very least, if you can't report for yourself, there should be mandated reporting, and of course the supports and services and resources that are needed to be able to deal with the influx of cases that would be coming in. And that would be it for me, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Arlene. This is Jennifer Mika, and I am excited to talk to you today about kind of tying what Amy talked about earlier and the growing pains that she and I have both experienced building up both a civil and criminal practice in financial exploitation of elders, and tying in kind of like how you get from a starting point where we are to where Arlene is, where she has seen these cases for many years, and you know, you can really fine-tune what you're looking for to be able to successfully prosecute them. So as Judith mentioned earlier, my position is very unique, in part because the District of Columbia is very unique. We do not have the authority locally to prosecute most of our adult crimes. That authority falls to the United States Attorney in the District of Columbia. That's because we are not a state. Similarly, all of our laws have to be approved by Congress. So there are a lot of, we've basically been forced to really think about collaborations, because they're basically how most things work here in the District of Columbia. So I think that one of the major themes that you can hear throughout all of our presentations is that collaboration is critical to these cases because they really require a holistic approach. Justice is going to look very different for each one of these cases. So I want to walk you through some of the things that some of the collaborations that I focused on to gain success from a criminal perspective. And I think it's also going to tie into the real value of having a civil component as well. So the first is obviously this federal-local partnership that we have to have in DC, but you should definitely think about doing in your own jurisdiction. So there's a lot of value in it. First, your information sharing can build stronger cases, and this goes both ways. At a local level, you might see a one-off case that you think is, there's no way we can prosecute this, there's not enough here, or, it really seems like this is just, the perpetrator is outside of our jurisdiction, so we're not going to be able to do it. If you are regularly communicating with your federal law enforcement partners and your federal prosecutor partners, you can flag these things and together you might be able to see larger trends and larger schemes and frauds. So conversely, that goes the other way, right? So federal folks oftentimes see a lot of cases that don't meet their monetary threshold for prosecution for various reasons, but otherwise are very strong cases. And if you have a good relationship with your federal prosecutors or your federal law enforcement partners, they can refer those cases to you where perhaps you're not looking for a $100,000 loss in order to prosecute a case. Just for reference, in the District of Columbia, and we can prosecute financial exploitation for really any amount as long as we can prove up those other elements. So I have a case right now that's pending where the loss is only $250. And to me and you, that might not sound like a lot, but to somebody who is living on Social Security and living in a facility, which means that the facility gets most of their Social Security money and they only get maybe $70 a month that is theirs, that $250 is really significant. And so I have the ability to seek justice in those cases, whereas, perhaps Social Security Administration, OPM, or VA would brush that to the side and eat it as a cost. So really valuable ways that you can take advantage of the authority that federal prosecutors have and local prosecutors. Similarly, you have different elements and standards that may be helpful. At the federal level, you may have some more forfeiture options in order to really gain restitution or obtain benefits for people. And conversely, at the local level, you may have the ability to use standards like undue influence that would be otherwise near impossible to prove at the federal level. And what this does overall when everybody's communicating is it enhances everybody's capacity to handle these cases. The other thing that we have found to be a really useful way of not only getting viable referrals, but ensuring that we are able to address cases in an effective manner is to think about interagency collaborations. And this is one of the areas where I think it was a big benefit for me to not have come to this position just being a prosecutor. I came to it as a subject matter expert, and certainly I had some growing pains and had to dust off the parts of my brain to remember criminal procedure and criminal law from law school, but I was right from the get-go able to think about and brainstorm all the different players that we would want to collaborate with to ensure that we could be creative about how we seek justice. There's different resources that different agencies can provide you, and certainly, even from even thinking about Amy's ability to seek civil action, I saw a lot of questions in the chat box about some of the challenges that may be faced in some of the cases she was identifying. And the benefit of having both that criminal and civil component in your jurisdiction is that if you have a fatal flaw in your criminal case, either because of an evidentiary issue that is unique to criminal law, or because you're not going to be able to meet that high standard, you have basically a second shot, another opportunity to seek justice for that victim if you have that civil remedy available, where perhaps there aren't those strict Fifth and Sixth Amendment issues, or perhaps there isn't as high of a standard or a burden that you have to meet. And so you have some real great options for how you can make sure that either way you can seek justice for people. And the other benefit to additional interagency collaboration is getting more referrals, the potential for more early intervention. So it may take you a little while to get that report from your police department, but if you're already in connection with Adult Protective Services or some of these other health service agencies that may be seeing people that are vulnerable or victims of elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation, you can jump in faster, you can seek civil remedies faster, you can put a stop to exploitation before it completely drains somebody's bank account. The other benefit to a holistic approach and why it's so important in these cases is, as Arlene mentioned, the vast majority of the cases that we see are interfamilial. And those are the most challenging cases to prove because, as Arlene said, victims are very hesitant to see their daughter, son, grandchild, niece, nephew go to jail. So if you have other options, other ways to stop the abuse, neglect, or exploitation, ensure that people are safe and protected, but perhaps do so in a way that doesn't necessarily create a criminal record for somebody who maybe otherwise would be able to move on with their life and be productive members of society. That's a great way of doing it. I've listed an alphabet soup of agencies that we've worked with. So the first four are our federal agencies: Social Security Administration, Office of Personnel Management, which manages a lot of the federal pensions and other types of benefits that people can get, VA for the benefits that they offer, and then also U.S. Postal Service, because they will prosecute or investigate cases that involve financial exploitation that relies on the mail system in order to mail checks, send different things to the mail, get money orders, those types of things. They are incredibly useful as investigators and really, really helpful to rely on. The others are some examples of our local agency collaborators. So the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit investigates crimes that occur in facilities that are funded by Medicaid, and every jurisdiction has one of those units. Really helpful collaborator. Our Department on Disability Services and Behavioral Health, our Department of Health, and of course our Metropolitan Police Department. But here in the district we have a plethora of other law enforcement partners. So for example, I have a case with the U.S. Capitol Police right now, so that's really helpful. So these are legitimate examples of, these are all things that I've seen in my 2 years in this position as to how collaboration has led to success in our area. So the creation of my position is because of collaboration. We have a multidisciplinary team focused on elder victims that advocated before the DC Council for the creation of the law that Amy talked to you about and for the creation of both of our positions. Our positions have identified, in our positions, we have identified a number of different updates to the law that are needed. So whereas Arlene was talking about how New York is the only only jurisdiction that does not have mandated reporting. DC does have mandated reporting for adults who are being abused, neglected, or exploited, but that law had not been updated in 35 years, and the penalty was $200, which is not going to motivate anybody to make a report. So that's one example of our collaboration with Adult Protective Services to improve that law, to make sure that we can effectively go after people who are failing to report who can. Again, we've seen a huge increase in referrals from federal and local partners. We have been able to connect elder victims with services. So a recent example is I have a detective working on a case, and he went to check in on our elder victim, and she has clearly declined in her cognitive abilities, and we were able to connect her directly with Adult Protective Services to get the support that she needs, because we're all working together and we all are connected to each other. Coordinated responses to known bad actors is really significant. This is especially helpful when you coordinate amongst agencies. We had a number of, as part of my first year in this position, I made it a point of kind of doing a road show and reaching out to all these different agencies that I knew would be helpful in our work. We were talking to one agency one day about, cases, and they flagged that there was this person that came up in a referral. And I'm not even kidding you. We went to a meeting with another agency in the afternoon, and they were like, gosh, we have this one person, she's horrible, she keeps getting licensed for these residential facilities, and then she steals people money, and it was the same person. And we were able to connect dots and really start building up a strong case about this woman, and we were able to identify the different agencies that would have information that we could use in our case, and we're moving very closely to filing charges against her. And then just overall success in prosecutions and seeking justice, not only on the criminal side, but also, as I said, on the civil side, where there are those fatal flaws in our criminal case such that we can't seek prosecution. So I've included 2 press releases here from our most recent successes. The one on the left is actually the first jury trial involving our new law on financial exploitation of an elder that I handled right before COVID in February, where we were able to prosecute a home health aide who was getting cash back when she was going to the mini mart down the street to get things for the person that she was caring for, and she was pocketing that cash back, and she got about $3,000 that way, and we were able to, she was convicted on all 4 charges. And then we also are awaiting sentencing for a case involving 2 bank employees who befriended an elderly woman by visiting her after hours and convinced her that she was rerouting money between 2 bank accounts when in fact she was moving money into their accounts, and they were doing things like taking trips to Miami and making purchases out of the minibar and renting red convertibles. So 2 great examples of successes that we've had. I would highlight that the second and one of the big benefits that we've had is a specialized investigator who has a plethora of experience in financial crimes, and we have, or specifically in financial crimes involving elders. And we've had him work with MPD officers to really build up their capacity and to partner on cases so that you have that specialized knowledge when you're doing these investigations. My wish list items are just more investigative resources in the same way that these cases require a real collaborative effort because they are holistic in nature. They also require a lot of different components that require specialized knowledge. So clinicians to tell you about whether or not somebody has capacity to know what they're doing when somebody asks them for money. Financial analysts who can comb through a year's worth of bank bank records and highlight for you the abnormalities or link the transactions between two different bank accounts so that you can see where money is flowing. I think generally kind of some larger issues is a broader societal awareness of elder justice issues, and specifically an understanding that they can be criminal. I can't tell you how many times I've had to tell beat cops that the case that they're being called out for that they don't think is worth filing a report about is actually a criminal case, because oftentimes they think that financial issues in families are civil in nature, and somebody should just sue the other person for the money. That's not the case. That's why we have fraud laws. That's why we have financial exploitation laws, because these are criminal cases, and they should be treated as such. Similarly, general understanding about, what is a power of attorney? We hear a lot from family members that say, I'm her guardian. And we say, okay, where's your court document saying that? And they don't have it because they think that there's some general, that they have some sort of authority because they're family. A wider understanding of undue influence and its use in the law is so important. I think right now D.C. is one of the few jurisdictions that has undue influence as a way of proving financial exploitation, and I would really like to see that be used across the country, because it is a really significant way of prosecuting these cases. Finally, more prevention tools, both at an institutional level and at a personal level. So institutionally, I'd love to see banks have more ability to freeze assets and to stop these issues before they become so egregious that nobody can, it's just too late. And I also think that at a personal level, I've found that these elder law issues, and the reason why I'm so passionate about them, is that they impact all of us. All of us can benefit from thinking about, nobody wants to think about when they're not able to take care of themselves. Nobody wants to think about what's going to happen when I die. But they are incredibly important conversations, and if more of us are having those conversations with our loved ones and our trusted family and friends, making advance directives, telling people what they want to have happen for their money, for their care, that is a huge step that we all can take in preventing these elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation for ourselves, for our friends, and for everybody in society.
Well, thank you very much for that very powerful ending, to your remarks. I'd like to ask both Arlene and Amy, too, why do you continue to do this work, especially Arlene, after the thousands of cases that you've seen? Why do you continue to do it?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't know. I ask myself that on many days, because sometimes it's so hard to do. I can't begin to tell you what it's like to constantly have parents and victims who don't want to go forward on charges. It's very difficult for prosecutors. I always wondered what it was like to have cases where victims actually wanted to come forward and wanted, justice in the case, and it's incredibly difficult for me and my prosecutors. I think I just don't like a bully, and so that's what drives me. And it's like, I just want people to stop hurting each other, and that's all I got to say about that.
Okay, Amy, what about you?
Before I came over to the Office of the Attorney General a year ago, I spent 16 years at Legal Counsel for the Elderly doing very similar work, directly representing low-income seniors in the district. And so I've had this question a lot throughout my career where people say, isn't the work that you do depressing? And my answer to that is always that it would be far more depressing if I wasn't doing it. and if I didn't know that it was being done well. And so, you know, I also want to right wrongs. It's, you know, why I went to law school, why a lot of us went to law school and became, you know, public interest, you know, law enforcement people. And so, you know, it's a wrong that I like to right. I like I liked my clients when I was working with them. And so it's, you know, it would be a lot more depressing if I weren't out there doing it. It's generally my answer.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I would like to say, can I just say this one thing? I'm sure this is part of it for me is that I grew up with my grandmother in the house, and we shared a bedroom for many, many years. We had a small house when I was growing up. And you know, she was such a wonderful person and taught me so much about life that I've always felt a kinship in some way with older people. And those were the victims I always ended up working with when I was just doing straight family violence. People would say, you know, Arlene likes to work with the older witnesses, you know, give this one to Arlene. So I think that might be how it started for me.
Well, that's you share that also with several other people I know in the field, including Mark Lax. We just have a couple more slides here. See? I just want to let everybody know about the Elder Justice website that we have, elderjustice.gov. It has a lot of general information about elder abuse, the different types. We have a specific section on financial exploitation, which I think is useful for, I hope, everyone. There are research resources and some useful court filings. And there are ready-to-use community presentations that you can download and customize for any presentations that you might be making. I'll make a plea today to all of you prosecutors and anyone else in law enforcement. Please help us continue to build the library of pleadings that we have at the Elder Justice website. And if you have some pleading you'd like to send, a sentencing memo, a motion in limine, whatever it is, and you think that it can be useful across the country, please send it in to elderjustice@usdoj.gov at the subject line EJI materials. We welcome your collaboration with us as we continue to build that field, that library for all of us in the field. Thank you very much, everyone, today. It's been a great discussion. As I'm seeing several of the questions, I believe most of them are being answered. I would add just one more thing to the collaborative group, and that is when I was doing these cases, I also got great collaboration from the Internal Revenue Service and the local tax authorities. So another place to think about using them in financial exploitation cases. And I think that, let's see, we have a couple other questions about, I believe, asset forfeiture and freezing of assets. There are a couple things that we can say about that. I think, Amy, were you asking that question, or are you answering a question from Chad on that? I wonder if you could share what happens in the District of Columbia.
Sure. In terms of our civil statute does actually provide for, it's not exactly, I guess, civil forfeiture, but it does provide in our statute, one of our remedies is even ex parte, freezing assets of the bad actor if we think they're holding some assets still. Our statute actually also provides for us to be able to freeze the victim's assets so that they're not further depleted, but we have to have a fiduciary appointed before we can do that. So that's a somewhat limited value because we have to go through the regular fiduciary channels in probate court.
Right. But there is, I think, I know asset forfeiture is a mighty powerful tool, at least in the federal system. And I see we have our slide back of today's speakers and their contact information, so feel free to contact them, or you contact me at judith.f.kozlowski@usdoj.gov. And I think that pretty much concludes our presentation today. If there's any other major questions, I'm not seeing them here other than the ones we may have to answer offline. Thank you so much to our speakers. It was really a great perspective, and I'm grateful to you, Amy, for bringing the civil perspective in, and Arlene for your vast experience on those physical cases. I think we sometimes forget that that's such an important part, especially neglect, and Jennifer for your perspectives coming to this work not necessarily as the prosecutor attorney at first, but as a subject matter expert and looking holistically as we build these cases and go forward. So thank you to all of you for your comments today.
Thank you for having us.